In our last lesson, we looked at some examples of Fauré's harmonic style. Because Fauré was so influential as a composer and a teacher, it's worth going further with this. Here we'll look at some of his cadences compared with the standard tonal cadences. Here are two of the most common tonal cadences. First one is 1-6-4-5-7-1. The second one is 4-5-1. These cadences, and some of their subvariants, end almost all the works in the classical canon of tonal music. Now let's look at the cadences from several movements in Fauré's Requiem. Listen to the end of the first movement. This movement ends in D minor, but notice how it's approached. The melody goes down from F to E flat to D. The bass line in the first bar could be from any number of classical works, but when the second bar arrives, the tonic is inverted, and it has an F sharp, making it sound like a 5 of 4. Now, if the harmony here just went from 5 of 4 to 4 to 5 to 1, it would be a fairly normal cadence. Before he continues with a more contrapuntal line in a sequence. Even this sequence isn't quite what we would expect. Notice the various chromatic inflections, like the G sharp in the third bar, the D sharp and G sharp in the fourth bar. So the sequential melody is harmonized with some little surprises. Finally, when the top line reaches the tonic, the bass imitates the melody in the previous bar. Thus, the final tonic is not prepared by traditional dominant harmony at all. Here, the rhythm and the thinning texture contribute a lot to the sense of finality. Okay, now let's look at the end of the second movement. Listen. First, this looks overall like a classical 5-1 cadence, but notice how the dominant chord is elaborated, touching on various passing harmonies in the middle parts. We pass through a 1-6-4, a 5-7, and then a 4 in the first half of the first bar. And notice how the 4 to 5 progression is underlined by the parallel fifths in the bass and tenor. Also, the 7th on the top voice resolves indirectly in the middle voice between the first and second bars. The anticipations at the end of this bar also color the cadence in a very personal way. Now let's examine the end of the fourth movement. Listen. Although there's a 5-1 progression here in the second bar, it doesn't arrive at the end of the phrase. In the first bar, we've started with a 1-6-4, but then it alternates with a 6-7 chord, and then when the leading tone arrives in the alto voice, the tenor has a D. So there's a fleeting impression of a 3-6 chord. Then, after the tonic has arrived, the last two bars move between two neighbor chords, which sound like 3 and 2-7. When the tonic finally arrives, the last sound we hear before it is that 2-7 sound. Again, the melodic line and the texture contribute to the sense of finality. Now listen to the end of the fifth movement. Here there's a clear dominant to tonic movement in the bass at the end. But if we look at the details, it isn't handled in a standard way. The chord before the dominant is a 6-7, but the 7th in the top part rises and the resolution is transferred to the tenor part. Then when the dominant arrives, it comes in as a 5-9, which then moves up stepwise to the tonic. So once again, the cadence has a very personal color. In all these examples, there are references to the standard classical cadences, but there are always elaborations and detours which color the harmony in a personal way. Fauré's harmonic style opens the doors to many new possibilities. While it does relate to the classical tonal language, all the details have one thing in common. They are the result of linear contrapuntal movements. Western music, having been contrapuntal for centuries, involves a balance between the vertical sonorities and voice leading and counterpoint. Voice leading has to do with a basic psychological fact of oral perception. Similar sounds moving by small intervals in the same register tend to be heard as coherent lines. This is why all these examples make oral sense. If they were transformed with large leaps, the result would be much less coherent. I call this kind of harmony linear harmony, and it explains many harmonic innovations in the 20th century. In our next lesson, we'll look at Berg's harmonic style. Future lessons will touch on composers like Prokofiev, Bartók, Dalla Piccola, Shostakovich, Sibelius, and others.